Experiencing Hoops Peterson himself on VSiN, the Sports Betting Network.
Kick off the football season with BetRivers Online Sportsbook. BetRivers is your go-to sportsbook for every line, boost, and special. Lace them up for week number 1, and BetRivers Parlay Insurance and Touchdown Insurance is offered every single Sunday all season long. Build a parlay of at least 4 legs, and if it loses, get your stake back as a free $25 bet. Wager on any player to score the first touchdown of the nighttime football game and get your money back as a free bet if they score an anytime touchdown. Head on over to BetRivers.com or download the BetRivers app. It is a whole new game as we are back here on the Greg Peterson Experience, and we're joined by a pair of men whose nickname, or whose, I should say, initials are DB, as David Bearman does a great job over at ESPN Chalk, and David Baker. He is a man that has won the Westgate SuperContest and is a professional poker player, and me and my producer were joking off air. We can't even use DB because you're both DB on this one. So, gentlemen, it is great to have you aboard. It is a dynamic duo, and we're going to go to Mr. David Bearman first because I know that you're someone that's out there in Connecticut but spent a lot of time in Florida. What was your overall takeaway from the team whose shirt you're wearing right now, the Miami Dolphins? Because that was one of the games that going into week 1, I was a little bit unsure of, because with the Patriots, they were going through coordinators in general, just having a little bit of flux there. And with the Miami Dolphins, it was a little bit of a new car smell with this team, all the weapons that they've gotten for Tua Tagovailoa. But week number 1 seemed to go quite well for Miami.
Yeah, it went quite well, Greg, and thanks for having me on. It was one of the few games where we call it the rocking chair game. No sweat, sit back, watch, no sweat. The Dolphins pretty much dominated the game from start to finish, right off the first interception of Mac Jones on the first drive. Dolphins scored field goal, then they scored another touchdown, and of course there was a nice touchdown at the end where McDaniel decided to go for it on 4th and 7 from midfield, and the second half basically was just playing out the string. I thought the defense played exceptionally well. It's still, as McDaniel said in his press conference, it's still the defense's team until the offense proves otherwise, but you have to come away a little bit impressed by at least the play calling, the way McDaniel handles the team, and the new acquisitions. I mean, Tyreek Hill, 6 catches right out of the gate in the first half, wound up with 8 for the game, used Waddle at the end of the first half. Chase Edmonds was nothing short of spectacular in terms of moving the chains, both catching the ball and running the ball. And, Tua looked okay. Would have liked to see him get rid of the ball a little bit earlier on times because the offensive line's still not there yet. But overall, have to be happy where, you basically stand toe-to-toe with Bill Belichick and the New England Patriots, punch him in the mouth a few times, and come away with the victory with really not a game that really wasn't in doubt at any point in the second half. So as a Dolphins fan and still season ticket holder of many years, coming away very, very happy with what they did. It was, hey, they won, they covered, and we're 1-0, and we're moving on to Baltimore next week.
And David, what did you make out of the week 1 game that we did wind up seeing between the Dolphins and the Patriots? Because I think that this one, because to David Bearman's point, we did wind up seeing this game be a little bit more of a rocking chair game, so it hasn't gotten as much attention as a lot of the games in which you wind up seeing crazy back and forth. But I do think that this was a little bit of an indictment on the New England Patriots, the fact that right now you're seeing the play calling be a little bit out of sorts, and the defense did not wind up looking terrible for the Patriots. But I think for the Patriots right now, it's a case of which buyer beware with this offense.
Yeah, I think this just confirmed all my priors that I had on the Patriots. I was impressed a little bit by the Dolphins. I wasn't sure what we were going to get week 1. I did like the Dolphins long-term. But as many people have said, this offseason was a very rocky one for the Patriots. They did not look good coming into week 1. I think most everybody sharp I talked to was not high on the Patriots, and I was not either. I think this team probably is closer to the Jets at this point than they are the Dolphins. Obviously, not even close to the Bills. This is a team I think we're looking at closer to a 6-10 season than we are a 10-6 season. So I'd be looking for spots to fade the Patriots until the market catches up with them. I thought they might come out okay in this game. I thought 3.5 might be a little much in what I assumed would be a slow, kind of run up the gut type attack by the Patriots, but they just didn't do anything. They didn't impress me on either side of the ball, and I'm going to be looking to fade them as much as possible early on.
And Mr. Baker, we will go back to you on this one as well, because you mentioned it. You weren't necessarily too surprised by what we wound up seeing on the Patriots, and I can't say that I was stunned. I just stayed off the game because I didn't really know what we were going to be able to get out of either of these teams. I wasn't too surprised that the Patriots looked a little bit disjointed, but was there a team or two on Sunday that you just took a look at them and you had a little bit of a different evaluation for them, and they either impressed you in a positive way or in a negative way, you were pretty disappointed with them?
I think a lot of my priors were kind of confirmed. I was really bullish on the Vikings coming into the season, and I thought that they were a definite dark horse contender. We talked about them last Sunday when I was in studio with you, and I thought that they were a nice dark horse to win the NFC. And now, to be honest, other than the Bucs, I think that it's the Eagles and the Vikings kind of sitting up there ready to take over the throne in the NFC. I mean, I'm not ready to completely bury the Rams or the Packers, but there was a lot of questions with both of those teams, and I think that the Vikings really showed me that they played that game with a bit of confidence and a bit of swagger. They didn't go in like, oh, we're going to try to upset the division champions. And I mean, obviously, I know most of our viewers now are betting people, and it's not a big upset. In fact, the Vikings even closed as a small favorite. But I think to the masses, the Vikings could have gone in there and just kind of been like, oh, we're going to try to go toe to toe with Aaron Rodgers, and they didn't. They went in. They were the bullies. They were the attackers, and I think that division is ripe for the Vikings now. So I'm happy with where I stand futures wise with the Vikings, and I think that they're gonna go. A lot's going to have to go through the Vikings to determine the NFC.
And I'll turn this one over to you, Mr. Bearman. How about what you were taken away from in week number one, whether it be a team that impressed you in a positive way or in a negative way? You were a little bit disappointed by how they wound up coming out week one.
I'm going to point, just like David did, to the NFC. I think it's more about the teams that didn't play well than it's about the teams that did play well. You look at some of the teams that we would have considered and still would consider contenders. Look what they did in week one. The Rams didn't look good. The Packers didn't look good. You saw San Francisco didn't look good. So there are a bunch of teams that are right there at the top of your futures board. And I agree with David that I think the Vikings came out and said that maybe the division will be up for grabs more so than you would think when the Packers opened at about minus 175 to minus 200 to win that division, which they very well could. I mean, last year they looked just as bad, if not worse, against the Saints, and then rolled out and won the division easily. But I think the Vikings are better than they were last year, and I think it's eye-opening to see some of these teams that no one saw the 49ers losing to the Bears. Even if you didn't want to lay the 7, you still didn't think the Niners were going to lose to the Bears. You would maybe think the Bills were going to beat the Rams, but you didn't think it was going to be a 3-touchdown blowout, and the Rams look as bad as they did. So you have to wonder, who is the king of the NFC? And honestly, Greg, this is one of my favorite weeks of the year because it's overreaction city after week one. And you're going to see a whole bunch of people jumping off the bandwagon of the Rams and the Packers and the Titans and some of the other teams that just did not look good today. The Colts, another team that people thought might be able to win that division with Matt Ryan, and they very well could, but you don't go out there and have to have a late rally to beat the Texans. And I was all over the Texans at +7. Today, I just didn't think it was going to be the Texans leading by 10 most of the game, if not should have won that game. So really, to me, it's who really is the contender and who isn't. Now, we're not going to get all answers after 1 week, but there are a lot of teams that we put up near the top that did not look very good today.
Yep, there were a lot of teams that they did not wind up coming out the way that you would like them to, and shall we say, kickers did not wind up coming out the way that they should as well. And David, I'm going to pose this question to you first, and then we'll probably pick it up on the other side with David Bearman. But with that said, when it comes to kickers, how important is it when it comes to handicapping a game? Because we saw a lot of games that were decided on the legs of kickers, and if you want to trusting in a guy like a Justin Tucker last year, you were able to pull out some of those games. I don't think that it's something that should be taken lightly when you do wind up evaluating these games.
Yeah, but the problem is there's really not a great way to handicap the kickers. I mean, Evan McPherson was widely thought of. I mean, last year down the stretch to get the Bengals to the Super Bowl, he was Mr. Reliable. He went into the year as, basically one of the most reliable kickers in the league. And he missed, he got an extra point blocked and then missed a 29-yard field goal and then missed another field goal. So as important as it is, there's just a lot of variance in it. So I don't really take into account that much. I assume we'll talk about the Bengals maybe coming out the next break, but like the Browns kicker, he was a rookie, and I hadn't even heard of him really, and he banged through that 60-yarder for the win, and the Bengals kicker's reliable, and he missed. So a lot of variance in kicking.
Yep, there certainly is. And how about if we talk about the Bengals on the other side, as it is the Greg Peterson Experience right here on VSiN, the Sports Betting Network.
Experiencing Hoops Peterson himself on VSiN, the Sports Betting Network.
Start your football season off on the right foot by subscribing to VSiN Pro. Get full access to everything that we do, including our daily picks at a glance, recapping all the top plays made by VSiN show hosts and guests, 24/7 video season prep, including our weekly college and pro football matchup guides covering every single game all season long, pro tools like exclusive betting splits and pro tips, updated every hour with actionable insights to help your betting game. Sign up for our discounted football special right now and give VSiN Pro all access, everything that we do now through the Super Bowl for just $175, or save 50% off the monthly price with an annual subscription. And bet smarter all year long. Go to VSiN.com/subscribe for all your options and become a part of the Sports Betting Network. As we're back here on the Greg Peterson Experience right here on VSiN, the Sports Betting Network, being rejoined by David Baker, former Westgate SuperContest winner and a professional poker player, and David Bearman does great work over at ESPN Chalk. And, well, David Baker, you wanted bringing up what I think we should talk about now, because you were talking about the Cincinnati Bengals. We wound up seeing McPherson wind up shinking a couple of kicks, and for the Bengals was a tumultuous game, to say the least, in which it was decided at the end, ironically enough, by a kick. But what were your takeaways from the Cincinnati Bengals in Week 1, a team that, as we know, they wound up going to the Super Bowl last season, but a lot of people, they weren't necessarily as bullish on them coming into this year?
Yeah, I was very disappointed by the outcome in this game. This was, I was heavily invested in the Bengals in every facet of everything that I do, contest-wise, survivor-wise. I really thought this was the best spot of the week. So I was very disappointed that the Bengals lost and didn't cover. But then I went back and I really looked inside this game, and my real takeaway and question from this game is, where was this revamped offensive line for the Bengals? Because Burrow was just under siege the whole game. A lot of those picks were just caused by pressure. So I want to know from the people who are really good at assessing the line play, really what went wrong from the Bengals from that standpoint. They dominated them statistically. I hope that the Bengals defense was great. Pittsburgh really did nothing. They really just scored based on the fact that they got 5 turnovers. So I really want to know what went wrong with this Bengals offensive line, and I'm going to hope that I can get a good number on the Bengals in upcoming weeks, because people might sour on them. I still think this team is really good, and Pittsburgh, hopefully maybe I can get a number fading Pittsburgh the other way, because Pittsburgh was not impressive to me at all. They were good defensively, but I just need to know whether this was a Pittsburgh dominated the offensive line because of their defensive line, or if there was something schematically wrong with how the Bengals offensive line worked today.
And how about if I pose the counter to you, David Bearman? What did you wind up seeing from the Pittsburgh Steelers of Week 1? Because with the Steelers, I don't think that this is a team that is going to be able to win games with their offense, but they were one of the most heavily invested teams in the offseason in their defense. And I do think that for staying in games, for being able to get some covers on larger lines like we wound up seeing in Week 1, they're a candidate for that. I don't know about outright wins, but I was rather impressed by the Steelers' defense.
I mean, the defense was impressive. They put a lot of pressure on the Bengals' offensive line, and I agree with David. The Steelers didn't do much other than take full advantage of how poor the Bengals played on offense in terms of their offensive line and the turnovers. And I mean, you got to give them credit. And Minkah Fitzpatrick is one of the best safeties in the business, and he showed that today with the interception and a couple of other batted balls, and then a sack fumble that he got. So they have the weapons on defense. Now, I think Watt's injury, if it is as bad as it looked in overtime, there is going to be a problem moving forward because that's one of the key weapons that the Steelers have on defense. But to David's point, what went wrong for the Bengals today where they couldn't literally keep Joe Burrow upright? Every time you took your eye off that TV and you looked over at the Steelers game, you saw Burrow either throwing a bad pass, getting knocked down, or somebody getting into the backfield. But to David's point, I mean, they still dominated statistically. Burrow had 340 yards passing. Mixon had 82 yards on the ground. You saw vintage Jamar Chase, who was last year's Rookie of the Year, out there with 10 for 129 and a touchdown. And for all intents and purposes, they should have won that game 100 different times. They had the ball down to the goal line and took 4 shots at the end zone, didn't get it. Tied the game, but would have won with the missed extra point. Missed a couple of field goals, and they lost their long snapper, which obviously hurt with the snapping of the field goals and the extra points. People right away are going to jump on Super Bowl hangover, because that's what happens when a team loses the Super Bowl. I'm not ready to bury the Bengals yet. I agree with David that you can look for a good price on Cincinnati next week and look to fade the Steelers, especially with Watt likely to be out, because I think the end result of this game is not indicative of what we think of these two teams. I'm not buying the Steelers, and I'm definitely not crushing the Bengals just yet. I think they'll be perfectly fine.
And to your point, if Watt is out of the fold for the Pittsburgh Steelers, that's a big cog for a team that they have their lifeblood on defense. They are not going to beat too many teams with Mitchell Trubisky and company trying to move the ball. So that is certainly something to take a look at for week 1. And we're mentioning the TJ Watt injury. I've got to pose this one to you guys. I'll start with you, David Baker, on this one. What do you make of the Dallas Cowboys? For one, what we wound up seeing in week 1 and trying to handicap them moving forward with Cooper Rush, because this has to be one of the biggest downgrades that we have at the quarterback spot. I would argue if the Green Bay Packers lose Aaron Rodgers and you trot out their Jordan Love, maybe it's a little bit more, but this is one of the biggest downgrades, in my opinion, that you could have at the quarterback spot. And for the Dallas Cowboys, they better hope that, in my opinion, they wind up being able to get back Dak Prescott as quickly as possible, because their season might be as good as toast if they don't.
Yeah, I think we can go ahead and cross the Cowboys off, honestly. This team's not making the playoffs. When you're looking at the division favorites that all struggled this week with the Rams, the Packers, and the Cowboys, I think we all kind of think that the Rams and the Packers will find a way. They still have their all-pro quarterback, great coaches, good infrastructure. And now we look at the Cowboys. They have no quarterback. They have no receivers. They have an old, slow Zeke at running back. The offensive line's banged up. They have a terrible head coach. I think this is just I think the Cowboys are done, and it's time to get ready for Sean Payton next year. I'm just going to write off the Cowboys at this point.
Yep, you mentioned it. They have Mike McCarthy as well. That's not necessarily a positive thing. And David Bearman, do you have anything different? Because I do think that if Dak Prescott is able to return, maybe it lends a little bit of value. But for as long as he's not out there on the field, this is a Cowboys team that you better be catching a whole lot of points with them, because you just have to pray that it's enough for them to cover.
Yeah, I wasn't high on the Cowboys to begin with. I had the Eagles winning that division before the season started, when they were not the favorite to win, before they took over as the favorite. The Cowboys have a lot bigger problems than Dak Prescott's injury and the downgrade to Cooper Rush. Like David said, slow running back, no receivers. The offensive line is terrible. The head coach is one of the worst in football. And whether it's Sean Payton or somebody else, you can go ahead and bury the Cowboys. Nothing that you saw today, independent of the Dak Prescott injury, showed me anything. I mean, the team couldn't move the ball at all. I mean, what did Dak have, 50 yards through 3 quarters? And it was at that point you knew that there was no possible way they were going to cover that game or come close to beating Tom Brady and the Buccaneers. And it's not like that was the greatest game we saw from Tom Brady and the Bucs. They were just the better team. And it's not like the Bucs aren't dealing with injuries. Their entire offensive line is injured. Brady's a million years old, and they just went right in there and destroyed the Cowboys. So with or without Dak, I'm not buying anything the Cowboys are selling. I didn't like them to begin with. And you got to question what Jerry Jones is seeing out there, keeping McCarthy another year, going with what they have. They showed me absolutely nothing at all. So I'm not buying anything they're selling, and I think you absolutely can go ahead and bury them. They're not someone I thought was going to contend to begin with, but people are in love with Dallas for whatever reasons that they are. They're a heavy public team. But I think the Eagles win that division, and I wouldn't be surprised to see the Giants finish second. I'm not buying them just yet, but I think they will be better than the Cowboys with the way the Cowboys look today. And I don't think anybody's going to be surprised if the Cowboys finish dead last in that division. We saw an improved Washington team, we saw an improved Giants team, and we saw a very good Eagles team out there today.
And I know that, David, you were talking about this, David Baker, because I know you were talking about the landscape of the NFC just being a little bit strange in general. How do you view it right now? Because, I mean, we can write off the Cowboys unless if they wind up returning Dak Prescott. A lot of moving parts with the Green Bay Packers. I take a look at the NFC, and it just seems weaker than the AFC, and I don't know if there's that one clear team that you're like, yep, this is going to be a team that's able to make the run in the playoffs.
Yeah, I was high on the Eagles as well. I got them when they were plus 220 to win that division. And I think the Eagles win this division by at least 2 games clear of their opponents. Yes, Washington won. Yes, the Giants won. But I don't think anybody's buying Tennessee or Jacksonville as being Super Bowl contenders. So I think both those teams struggled to get to 500. The Eagles have kind of a cakewalk to a 10-11 win season. I think the Eagles might be the favorite right now, outside of the Bucs. I mean, the Bucs are number 1 in the NFC at this point, but I think the Eagles are strong number 2 with, I would say, Vikings/Packers number 3, or Rams, I guess. That's kind of how I'm viewing the NFC.
Yep, the NFC, it has become a little bit of a mess, but there was a team that in week 1 we were having towards the top of the odds board in terms of the futures, and they look very solid. We're going to talk about them next, right here on the Greg Peterson Experience on VSiN, the Sports Betting Network.
Experiencing Hoops Peterson himself on VSiN, the Sports Betting Network.
Kick off the football season with BetRivers Online Sportsbook. BetRivers is your sportsbook for every line, boost, and special. Lace them up for our BetRivers Parlay Insurance and Touchdown Insurance, which is offered every Sunday all season long. Build a parlay of at least 4 legs, and if it loses, you get your stake back of a free bet of at least $25. Head on over to DraftKings.com or download the BetRivers app. It's a whole new game as we're back here on the Greg Peterson Experience, and we're being rejoined by David Bearman, who does great work at ESPN Chalk, and David Baker, former SuperContest winner and a man that is also a professional poker player. And David Bearman, we're going to be posing this one to you first. We mentioned it just before the break. There were a lot of teams that they did not wind up looking so impressive in week number 1 that were towards the top of the futures board. This team, they looked every bit the part of a team that should be towards the top of the odds board to be able to win the Super Bowl, and that would be the Kansas City Chiefs. They completely blow out the Arizona Cardinals, and we were talking about this a little bit off air. Really, the AFC contenders, they look solid. Sans the Cincinnati Bengals, which we alluded to the fact that there were some strange things that wound up happening in that game, but what was your takeaway overall from the Kansas City Chiefs and a lot of the, shall we say, contenders in the AFC in week 1?
I mean, the Kansas City Chiefs were absolutely impressive. Pat Mahomes and company looked extremely good, but I just don't think the Arizona Cardinals are what we saw last year, with Arizona coming out of the gate going 7-8-1, and then tailing at the end. You're used to the Cardinals and or Cliff Kingsbury starting out strong and then fading, and they looked every part of awful today. They let Kansas City go up and down the field, and you have to think that Mahomes and company had a little bit chip on the shoulder, losing Tyreek Hill. A lot of people out there saying they're not going to be as good as they were, and I'm one of them. I took the under 10.5 on their win total, and it was more of their schedule. If you look at their schedule, they still have the toughest schedule in the NFL, and I don't think beating Arizona changes anything there, because they play in what might wind up being the best division in possibly NFL history, if you look at how strong that division is and how much they got better in the offseason with Devontae Adams and Russell Wilson and others in terms of how good that division is going to be. They still got to go right through that gauntlet. So, yes, give them credit for going and destroying Arizona, who obviously isn't as good as we thought they were going to be, or at good at all. Probably a 7-win team, maybe 8. Last year they got blown out in the wild card game versus the eventual Super Bowl champion Rams. But that's going to be a very, very tough division for the Chiefs. And if you look top to bottom, Chargers looked very, very good today in beating a Vegas team that I thought looked good as well in the loss. And we'll see Denver and Russell Wilson tomorrow night versus Seattle. So I'm not ready to basically say Kansas City is going to win the AFC. The AFC is going to be very, very tough for Kansas City to go through. And, last year they almost won it all and losing to Cincinnati. And, they're not as good as Buffalo, and we'll see that over the course of time. But if you wake up tomorrow morning and look at the AFC standings, there's not much that it's going to surprise you outside of the Bengals losing to the Steelers. I think the rest of the conference played out the way it was supposed to play. And even though the Colts tied, I wouldn't worry about that too much. They still came back and did tie the Texans after being down all game. But Buffalo dominated. You look at Buffalo and Miami, 1-2 in the AFC East. The AFC West right now is, it's going to be strong, and it looks strong even in defeat with Vegas. And I think if you think about the NBA over the years when the Western Conference was more dominant than the East, and you were trying to figure out who was even going to be the 8th seed or the 7th seed in the East, going to be under 500, sort of what you're going to see with the AFC and NFC right now in football is AFC's loaded. And we talked earlier, we can't find more than 2 or 3 teams in the NFC.
And Mr. Baker, I'll pose this one to you because we wound up seeing all the reactions from Sunday, but I take a look at the AFC, and I think that the Chiefs' performance, it was probably the most impressive, but I think that a lot of people are losing sight of what the Bills wound up doing on Thursday night just because it's not as fresh in mind. And I take a look at the Bills, team that entered into the season at the top of the odds board to be able to win the Super Bowl. I don't think that we should lose sight with everything that we wound up seeing on Sunday as to how terrific they wound up looking on the road against the Rams on Thursday night.
Yeah, I still think the Bills are the class of the AFC, but it is wide open, and by wide open I mean for the top 5 or 6 teams. I am with David. I did not think that Kansas City was going to be as good as they were in the years past. I thought that the fact that Mahomes was just so much better than all the other quarterbacks for the last few years, and I think the gap is kind of narrowed, not because he's gotten worse, but because quarterbacks like Herbert and Josh Allen have ascended so much that maybe they closed the gap on the Chiefs. But the Chiefs looked every bit the part that they have the past few years. But as well as, along the same lines as David, I'm not really sold on the Cardinals either. So let's see what happens through this Chargers, Colts, Bucks next 3 games with the Chiefs. I still think the Chargers are going to be right there as well. So I know there's been a lot of love for Baltimore in the preseason, and Lamar looked great. So the AFC is what we expected. If you had a hot take in the AFC, you were probably proven wrong. It was kind of chalk city in the AFC. So it's just going to kind of have to play out. We have to see who gets injured and can make it through the whole gauntlet of the NFL season. But I think it's Bills, Chiefs, Chargers, really. Bills, Chiefs, Chargers, and maybe Ravens. I know the Broncos are up there. I'm not buying the Broncos. Broncos aren't. To me, I think the Broncos missed the playoffs. So I like the Raiders more than I like the Broncos. And the Raiders look good to me despite losing to the Chargers, who I think they're probably my second favorite team.
We shall see what happens on Monday night with the Broncos. I'm in agreement. I would take the Raiders a little bit before the Broncos. And let's take a look forward at some of these Week 2 games as well, as I know that there's a lot of people out there going to be mentioning a lot of trends with regards to how teams wind up doing against the spread coming off a loss. But I know that, and you're able to get these pro tips at VSiN.com/subscribe. We wind up giving one out once every hour. But Week 1 dogs coming off of a straight-up loss when they're a favorite against the spread at home. 26-44-1 against the spread in Week 2 when they are a home favorite. So I do think that that's interesting. But, David, we do know that aside from these ordeals, we have seen a lot of teams be able to bounce back in Week 2 after they wind up taking up a little bit of a tough defeat in Week 1. Is there any team that you're taking a look at in Week 2 to be able to bounce back after it was a relatively grody showing for them in Week 1?
It would probably be either the Rams. Oh, I didn't know which David you were wanted.
That's on me. We've got 2 Davids with the last name starting with a B. So we'll start with David Bearman.
I'm looking at both the Rams and the Packers, who basically the Rams are getting the Falcons, who are, the Falcons were better than we expected today, but then they did what the Falcons always do and then blow a big double-digit lead in the fourth quarter. And the Packers, off their awful Week 1 defeat to the Vikings, get the Bears at home, who, by the way, the Bears look better than we expected today, or maybe the Niners just didn't look good at all in the bad weather. But I think that's a prime spot for both of those teams to bounce back and say, all right, we looked terrible in week one. And, I'm not ready to bury the Rams. They did lose to the best team in football, to the Bills on a night where they were, celebrating their Super Bowl and all that. Bills are pretty good, as David alluded to. I think the Rams come back out here and crush the Falcons, and I would not be surprised to see Aaron Rodgers and company put a whooping on the Bears, which they do every single year. I mean, he owns the Bears, as he has said and as he has proven. Both are around 9.5, 10, 11 points, and I would not be surprised to see both of them run away with those.
And Mr. Baker, we will pose this one to you as well. Is there a team that wound up having a bad showing in week one that you think is going to be able to bounce back in week two?
Well, just on those two games, I'm not really neither of those games are going to tell me anything as far as I'm concerned. They're both going up against bottom five teams. So, yeah, feel free to come out and whoop up on those teams. Let me see you versus teams of equal or semi-equal strength. I am kind of curious what the Colts are going to look like. They already failed test one against the Texans, and now they have to go to Jacksonville, a team that has really done well versus them in the past. They have to travel to Jacksonville after Jacksonville knocked them out of the playoffs. They had a playoff seed locked up last year. All they had to do was beat them at home as a double-digit favorite. So I want to see what the Colts have against the Jags. I believe in this Colts team. I like Matt Ryan. I like what they're doing there, but let me see that. Also, I'm really excited to see the Vikings Eagles. Like we've talked about, I'm very high on both of these teams, and they're playing this week. So I think that's a very interesting game. Also, the Ravens Dolphins. The Dolphins did beat up on the Patriots, but now they get a complete upgrade in competition level, and let's see how they can react against a tough Baltimore team.
To your point, I know that both of you gentlemen were speaking quite highly of the Vikings and the Eagles. Right now, Eagles, home team, 3-point favorite against the Minnesota Vikings. So that tells you that the bookmakers, they are relatively high on both of these teams and sort of have them in that same class as well. As this has been, in my opinion, the greatest panel that we've ever had of two guys with the first name David and with last name starting with the letter B. Gentlemen, great to have both of you guys aboard. Thank you so much for joining me tonight.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Thanks, Greg. Good time.
Great to be able to have David Bearman, who does great work over there at ESPN Chuck, along with David Baker, who is a former SuperContest winner aboard. Was a great roundtable conversation, as got in a lot of reaction from week one, turned it forward to week two. Now coming up next, let's take a little bit of a look at the baseball card for Monday right here on VSiN, the Sports Betting Network.